The Iraqi dinar is facing fresh pressure today as political tensions with Washington weigh heavily on Iraq's financial system, while at the same time global gold prices are breaking records and signaling rising uncertainty across world markets. The dinar weakened sharply, falling to around 151,500 Iraqi dinars for every $100. Currency traders say the rate could slide even further, possibly reaching 153,000 per $100 if current conditions continue. Demand for US dollars has increased quickly, but supply remains limited, creating strong pressure on local exchange markets. One of the main reasons behind the drop is tighter government control over electronic dollar transfer systems. These new procedures have slowed down access to foreign currency, making it harder for merchants and importers to secure the dollars they need to conduct international trade. As a result, many businesses are being forced to buy dollars at higher market prices, which pushes the exchange rate up even more. At the same time, growing political pressure from the United States is adding to the uncertainty. Washington has reportedly stepped up its demands regarding the formation of Iraq's next government, particularly calling for the removal of armed factions and militias from key decision-making roles. This has created fears that financial tools could be used as leverage. There are concerns that the US could restrict Iraq's access to its oil revenues, which are held at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Since oil accounts for more than 90% of Iraq's state income, any disruption to those funds could have serious consequences. Experts warn this could lead to delayed public sector salaries, reduced government spending, and wider economic instability. Some analysts describe the situation as economic pressure through what they call dollar starvation, where access to US currency becomes limited. Even the threat of banking restrictions or frozen assets has increased anxiety among traders and investors, leading many to rush toward safer options. While Iraq struggles with currency weakness, gold prices are moving in the opposite direction. The precious metal has surged past $5,100 per ounce for the first time in history. Prices jumped rapidly in a short period, continuing a powerful rally that has more than doubled gold's value over the past 2 years. Investors around the world are turning to gold as a safe haven. Rising geopolitical tensions, large-scale purchases by central banks, and expectations that US interest rates could fall are all contributing to the surge. When uncertainty increases and currencies weaken, gold often becomes the preferred store of value. These global and local developments are closely connected. As confidence in political stability declines and economic risks grow, both businesses and investors become more cautious. In Iraq, merchants are closely monitoring exchange rates throughout the day, worried that further depreciation could raise the cost of imports and everyday goods. For many ordinary citizens, the effects are already being felt through higher prices and increased cost of living. With the dinar under pressure and gold signaling broader global fears, markets remain tense as everyone watches for the next move from both Baghdad and Washington. The Iraqi dinar is once again under significant pressure, and today the currency markets across Iraq are reacting to a combination of political uncertainty, tighter financial controls, and growing international tension. Over the past several hours, the dinar has weakened noticeably against the US dollar, raising concerns among traders, merchants, and ordinary citizens who depend on a stable exchange rate for their daily livelihoods. The rate has slipped to around 151,500 Iraqi dinars for every $100, and many market participants fear this may only be the beginning of a deeper decline. Some analysts and currency exchange operators are already warning that the rate could move toward 153,000 dinars per $100 if current pressures continue to build. This decline is not happening in isolation. It reflects a broader imbalance between supply and demand inside Iraq's currency market. Demand for US dollars has risen sharply in recent days, especially among importers and business owners who rely on foreign currency to pay suppliers overseas. Nearly everything from food products to electronics and construction materials requires dollar payments. When businesses cannot easily obtain those dollars through official channels, they turn to the open market. That sudden surge in demand pushes prices higher, and the dinar loses value even faster. At the same time, the supply of US dollars has become tighter. Currency dealers report that access to official dollar transfers has been restricted by stricter procedures and regulatory controls. These measures are meant to monitor financial flows and prevent misuse, but they have also slowed down legitimate transactions. Merchants who once obtained dollars quickly now face delays, paperwork, and limits on how much they can buy. As a result, fewer dollars are circulating in the market, creating a bottleneck that intensifies the imbalance. When supply shrinks and demand grows, exchange rates naturally move against the local currency. That is exactly what Iraq is experiencing now. Exchange shops in cities like Baghdad, Erbil, and Basra are seeing long lines of customers looking to secure dollars before the rate climbs even further. This behavior often becomes self-reinforcing. The more people expect the dinar to weaken, the faster they rush to buy dollars. That rush itself causes the dinar to weaken more, creating a cycle that is difficult to break. For many Iraqis, this is not just a financial statistic on a screen. It directly affects everyday life. A weaker dinar means higher prices for imported goods, and because Iraq imports a large share of its basic needs, even small changes in the exchange rate can quickly translate into noticeable increases at the market. Groceries, medicine, household products, and fuel-related costs all become more expensive. Families with fixed incomes feel the strain first, as their purchasing power shrinks almost overnight. Small business owners are also under pressure. Shopkeepers who depend on imported inventory must pay more for restocking their shelves. Some are forced to raise prices, while others accept smaller profit margins just to keep customers. In either case, the environment becomes more difficult and unpredictable. Planning ahead becomes nearly impossible when the exchange rate can change dramatically within hours. Behind the technical factors of supply and demand, political developments are playing a major role in shaping market sentiment. Tensions between Baghdad and Washington have added another layer of uncertainty to Iraq's economic outlook. The United States has reportedly increased its pressure regarding the composition of Iraq's next government, particularly focusing on the presence of armed groups and militias within state institutions. These political disagreements may seem distant from daily market activity, but they have very real financial consequences. The United States holds considerable influence over Iraq's access to the global dollar system. Much of Iraq's oil revenue, which forms the backbone of the country's economy, is processed and stored through US-linked financial institutions. Because oil exports account for more than 90% of Iraq's government income, any disruption to those funds could create immediate stress on the entire financial system. Even the possibility of restrictions or delays can trigger anxiety among investors and traders. That anxiety shows up quickly in the currency market. When people fear that dollar flows could be interrupted, they try to secure dollars ahead of time. This defensive behavior increases demand further, accelerating the dinar's decline. In other words, expectations alone can move the market even before any official action is taken. Rumors, headlines, and political statements can sometimes have as much impact as actual policy changes. The Iraqi dinar has entered another period of visible strain, and across the country the effects are being felt not just in financial markets but in daily life, in small shops, in wholesale markets, and inside homes where families are trying to make sense of rising prices. Over the past several days, the value of the dinar has weakened against the US dollar, and what might look like a simple change in exchange rates is actually the result of deeper structural and policy shifts that are reshaping how money moves through Iraq's economy. At the center of the issue is a tightening of electronic dollar transfer rules, a change that has made it more difficult for merchants and businesses to access the foreign currency they rely on, forcing many into higher-cost alternatives and pushing the exchange rate even higher. To understand what is happening, it helps to picture how Iraq's trade system works. Iraq imports a large portion of its everyday goods from abroad. Food items, electronics, machinery, construction materials, medicine, and countless other products are purchased from international suppliers, and those suppliers typically demand payment in US dollars. The dollar has long served as the main currency for global trade, and Iraq is no exception. This means that businesses inside Iraq must constantly convert dinars into dollars just to keep their operations running. In the past, many of these dollar transactions were processed through official banking channels and electronic transfer platforms that allowed companies to buy dollars at regulated rates. Merchants would submit paperwork, show invoices, and receive the foreign currency needed to pay their overseas partners. While the system was not perfect, it provided a predictable flow of dollars into the market. Predictability is important because businesses can plan costs, set prices, and manage risk more effectively when they know they can access foreign currency without sudden disruptions. Recently, however, the government has introduced tighter controls on these electronic dollar transfers. The goal behind these measures is often described as improving oversight, preventing illegal transactions, and ensuring that dollars are used for legitimate trade rather than smuggling or money laundering. From a regulatory perspective, this may seem reasonable. Authorities want transparency and accountability, especially in a country where financial leakages have historically been a problem. But while the intentions may be administrative or security-related, the immediate impact on the market has been significant. The new procedures require additional documentation, more verification steps, and stricter approval processes. Transactions that once took hours or a day can now take much longer. Some requests are delayed, others are rejected, and many merchants say they are uncertain about which applications will be approved. That uncertainty alone is enough to create stress in the market. When businesses cannot rely on the official system to deliver dollars on time, they begin searching for alternatives. Imagine being an importer who needs to pay a supplier in another country within 3 days. Your shipment is ready, and if you miss the payment deadline, the supplier might cancel the order or charge penalties. You go to your bank to secure dollars, but the transfer is delayed due to new regulations. You are told to wait for additional review. Waiting is not an option, because your entire inventory depends on that payment. So you turn to the open market, where currency dealers can provide dollars immediately, but at a higher rate. Even though it costs more, you accept the price because your business depends on it. When hundreds or thousands of businesses make the same decision at the same time, demand in the open market surges. Currency dealers quickly notice that more people want dollars than usual. Basic economics takes over. When demand rises and supply stays limited, prices go up. In currency terms, that means it takes more dinars to buy each dollar. The dinar weakens, not necessarily because the economy collapsed overnight, but because access to official dollars has tightened and everyone is competing for a smaller pool of available currency. This shift from official channels to the parallel or black market has become one of the most important drivers of the dinar's decline. The black market is faster and more flexible, but it is also more expensive and volatile. Rates change quickly, sometimes several times a day. There is less transparency, and spreads between buying and selling prices are wider. That volatility spreads uncertainty throughout the economy. Businesses can no longer predict costs accurately, which makes pricing goods more complicated. For a small shop owner, this can be devastating. Suppose you sell imported electronics. Last week you calculated your prices based on one exchange rate, but today the dinar has weakened further. The cost of replacing your inventory has suddenly increased. If you keep your prices the same, you lose money. If you raise them, customers may buy less. Either way, you are squeezed. Multiply this situation across thousands of shops and markets, and the entire economy begins to feel the pressure. Consumers notice the effects almost immediately. Imported food becomes more expensive. Medicine costs more. Household appliances, phones, and car parts rise in price. Even products that are partially produced locally often rely on imported components, so their prices increase too. Inflation creeps into daily life, and families find that their salaries do not stretch as far as they used to. What once covered a month of expenses now runs out in 3 weeks or less. When people see prices rising and the dinar losing value, they naturally try to protect themselves. Some convert their savings into dollars as a precaution. Others buy gold. These actions make sense on an individual level, but collectively they add more pressure to the currency market. More people buying dollars means even higher demand, which pushes the exchange rate further. It becomes a cycle driven by both necessity and fear. Merchants, meanwhile, face a constant race against time. Many operate on thin profit margins and cannot afford large losses. When access to official dollars slows down, they have to make quick decisions. Do they wait and risk missing shipments, or do they pay higher rates in the market? Most choose the latter. Speed matters more than price when contracts and supply chains are involved. That choice keeps the black market active and strong. Another layer of complexity comes from expectations. Markets do not only react to what is happening now, they also react to what people think will happen next. If traders believe that transfer restrictions will tighten further, they rush to buy dollars today before access becomes even harder tomorrow. That early buying pushes rates up in advance, sometimes creating the very problem they feared. Expectations can move currencies just as much as actual policy changes. Banks are caught in the middle of all this. On one hand, they must follow government rules and comply with tighter oversight. On the other hand, they face pressure from customers who need dollars urgently. When banks cannot meet demand, trust begins to erode. Businesses may rely less on formal institutions and more on informal networks, which weakens the overall financial system. Restoring that trust later can be difficult. At the national level, the weakening dinar also complicates government finances. Iraq's budget depends heavily on oil revenues, which are earned in dollars. While a weaker dinar might appear to increase the local currency value of those revenues, the benefits are often offset by higher costs for imports and public spending. Infrastructure projects, government purchases, and social programs become more expensive. Planning becomes harder when exchange rates are unstable. The psychological impact should not be underestimated either. Currency stability is closely linked to confidence in the economy. When people see their money losing value, they feel uncertain about the future. That uncertainty can reduce spending and investment. Businesses delay expansion. Investors wait on the sidelines. Economic growth slows, not necessarily because of a lack of resources, but because of a lack of confidence. In many ways, the tightening of electronic dollar transfer rules has acted like a bottleneck in a system that depends heavily on smooth financial flows. When the flow slows down, pressure builds behind it. Eventually that pressure finds another path, which in this case is the open market. But that alternative path comes at a higher cost, and those costs ripple through the entire economy. Currency dealers in cities across Iraq now watch rates constantly, adjusting prices throughout the day. Screens flicker with new numbers. Phones ring with clients asking for quotes. Some days the dinar stabilizes briefly, only to weaken again when fresh demand appears. The environment feels tense and reactive. Every piece of news, every policy announcement, every rumor can trigger another wave of buying or selling. For ordinary citizens, these financial mechanics are less important than the simple reality that life is getting more expensive. A trip to the market costs more than it did last month. School supplies are pricier. Medical bills take up a larger share of income. People talk about exchange rates in cafes and workplaces because they know those numbers directly affect their budgets. The currency has become part of everyday conversation. All of this traces back to a basic chain reaction. Electronic dollar transfers become harder. Merchants struggle to access official dollars. Businesses turn to higher-cost market rates. Demand in the open market surges. The exchange rate climbs. The dinar weakens. Prices rise. Confidence falls. More people rush to secure dollars. And the cycle continues. Breaking that cycle requires restoring smoother access to foreign currency through official channels and rebuilding trust that dollars will be available when needed. Until then, each delay or restriction adds another layer of pressure. The dinar's movement is not just a number on an exchange board. It is the visible result of countless decisions made by merchants, banks, regulators, and families trying to adapt to a system that suddenly feels tighter and less predictable. The atmosphere in Iraq's financial markets has grown increasingly tense as political developments abroad begin to shape economic realities at home. Over the past several weeks, traders, bankers, merchants, and ordinary citizens have all been watching the same thing with growing concern: the deepening pressure coming from Washington and the way that pressure is translating directly into stress on Iraq's access to the US dollar. What might sound like distant diplomatic disagreements are, in practice, affecting exchange rates, bank transfers, salaries, and the daily cost of living. The connection between politics and money has rarely felt more immediate. At the heart of the situation is the relationship between Iraq and the United States, a relationship that has always carried both cooperation and tension. Iraq's modern financial system is deeply tied to the global dollar network, and because the dollar remains the dominant currency for international trade, banking, and energy markets, any country that depends heavily on oil exports and imports of consumer goods inevitably relies on smooth access to US currency. Iraq is one of those countries. Its economy runs on dollars just as much as dinars, and that dependence gives Washington considerable influence. Much of Iraq's oil revenue, which forms the backbone of the national budget, flows through accounts linked to the US financial system. Oil is sold internationally in dollars, and those dollars are processed through mechanisms connected to American institutions. This structure was designed to provide transparency and stability, but it also means that access to Iraq's own money can be affected by US policy decisions. In times of strong cooperation, this arrangement functions smoothly. In times of political disagreement, it can quickly become a source of pressure. Recently, that pressure has intensified. Washington has signaled that it wants significant changes in how Iraq's next government is formed and how power is distributed within state institutions. In particular, US officials have expressed concerns about the presence of armed groups and militias inside the political system. They argue that decision-making authority should rest solely with formal state structures and not with factions that operate outside direct government control. From Washington's perspective, limiting the influence of such groups is tied to security and regional stability. However, these political demands do not exist in isolation. They come with financial consequences, either implied or explicit. The message reaching Iraqi policymakers and market participants is that failure to meet these expectations could lead to economic measures. Those measures might not always be labeled as sanctions, but they could still have similar effects. Even the possibility of restrictions is enough to unsettle the market. One of the most powerful tools in this situation is control over dollar transactions. Because Iraq depends so heavily on dollars for trade and government spending, any slowdown or limitation in dollar access can have immediate and widespread effects. If banks struggle to process international payments, imports stall. If government institutions cannot easily receive or transfer funds, salaries and projects face delays. The dollar is not just another currency in Iraq. It is the lubricant that keeps the entire economic machine moving. Talk of freezing Iraqi assets has added another layer of anxiety. Much of the country's oil revenue is held in accounts abroad before being used to pay for public expenses. If access to those funds were ever restricted, even temporarily, the consequences could be severe. Public sector salaries, pensions, infrastructure contracts, and essential services all depend on those revenues. A freeze or delay could create what some analysts describe as a salary shock, where millions of workers suddenly face uncertainty about their income. The mere discussion of such possibilities is enough to change behavior. Traders do not wait for official announcements. They act on expectations. When they hear that assets could be frozen or transfers could be restricted, they begin preparing for the worst. Currency dealers raise their prices. Businesses rush to secure dollars in advance. Investors move money into safer assets. This collective reaction pushes the dinar downward even before any policy is formally implemented. Banking restrictions are another concern that looms large. If Iraqi banks were cut off or partially limited from the international financial system, even routine transactions could become complicated. Letters of credit might take longer to process. Payments to foreign suppliers could be delayed. Companies that rely on smooth cross-border transfers might find themselves stuck in limbo. The modern economy depends on speed and reliability, and any disruption to that flow increases costs. Imagine an importer trying to bring in food supplies. They negotiate with a foreign supplier, arrange shipping, and prepare payment through their bank. If the bank suddenly faces additional checks or restrictions tied to dollar transfers, the payment might be delayed for days or weeks. The supplier may refuse to ship goods without confirmation. That delay can cause shortages in local markets. Shortages then push prices higher. In this way, a political decision made thousands of miles away can directly affect the price of bread or medicine in Iraqi stores. Currency markets respond quickly to these risks. As soon as traders sense that dollar access might become tighter, demand rises sharply. Everyone wants to secure dollars while they still can. Exchange shops see long lines of customers converting dinars into dollars. Businesses stockpile foreign currency to protect themselves against future disruptions. This surge in demand weakens the dinar further, creating a visible sign of deeper anxiety. For ordinary citizens, these developments can feel abstract at first, but the effects soon become tangible. A weaker dinar means imported goods cost more. Because Iraq imports a large share of its consumer products, prices across the board begin to rise. Food, electronics, clothing, building materials, and medicine all become more expensive. Families feel the pressure in their daily budgets. Salaries remain the same, but expenses climb steadily. Public employees worry about something even more basic: whether they will be paid on time. If oil revenues are disrupted or government accounts are restricted, salary payments could face delays. In a country where a significant portion of the population depends on public sector employment, even short interruptions could create widespread hardship. This possibility weighs heavily on people's minds and adds to the sense of instability. Merchants and business owners face a different kind of stress. They must constantly adjust prices to reflect exchange rate changes. A shipment that was affordable one week might be far more expensive the next. Contracts become risky because costs are unpredictable. Some businesses reduce orders to avoid losses, which can lead to fewer goods in the market. Others raise prices to protect their margins, which reduces consumer purchasing power. Either way, economic activity slows. Investors interpret these signals carefully. When they see political tensions rising and financial restrictions being discussed, they tend to pull back. New investments are postponed. Expansion plans are delayed. Capital that might have gone into factories, shops, or services instead sits on the sidelines or moves abroad. Over time, this cautious behavior can slow job creation and economic growth, compounding the original problem. The relationship between Washington and Baghdad therefore becomes more than a diplomatic issue. It turns into a daily economic reality for millions of people. Every statement from U.S. officials is analyzed for clues about potential policy moves. Every rumor about sanctions or restrictions circulates quickly through markets. Even if nothing concrete happens, uncertainty alone can be damaging. There is also a psychological dimension that is easy to overlook. Currency stability depends heavily on trust. People must believe that their money will hold value and that the financial system will function normally. When that trust weakens, behavior changes. People hoard dollars. They move savings into gold or foreign currencies. They hesitate to invest or spend. These protective actions make sense individually but collectively weaken the domestic currency further. Some observers describe the situation as a form of economic leverage rather than direct punishment. Instead of broad, official sanctions, pressure can be applied quietly through tighter oversight, slower approvals, or more restrictive banking procedures. These steps may be justified on technical or compliance grounds, yet their overall effect is similar to more visible sanctions. Dollar flows slow down, costs rise, and the local economy feels squeezed. Iraq's heavy dependence on oil revenue makes it particularly vulnerable. With more than 90% of state income coming from oil exports, there is little room for alternative funding sources. If dollar access tightens, the government has limited options. It cannot easily replace that revenue or switch to another currency overnight. This lack of flexibility increases the impact of any external pressure. Political leaders inside Iraq therefore face difficult choices. They must balance domestic political realities with international expectations. Decisions about who participates in government are no longer purely internal matters. They carry financial consequences. The line between politics and economics becomes blurred. A cabinet appointment can influence exchange rates. A diplomatic dispute can affect the price of groceries. Meanwhile, in currency markets, the numbers continue to move. Dealers adjust their boards. Rates tick upward. Conversations grow more urgent. Every rise in the dollar is a reminder of the underlying tension. People check rates on their phones multiple times a day, not out of curiosity but out of necessity. For many families and businesses, these numbers determine whether the month will be manageable or difficult. The situation illustrates how interconnected the modern world has become. A decision made in Washington about banking rules or political conditions can ripple through international finance, reach Iraqi banks, influence exchange shops, and finally affect the price tags in neighborhood stores. The chain is long, but it is direct. No part of the system is isolated. As pressure continues to build, the central challenge becomes restoring confidence. Markets calm down when they believe access to dollars will remain stable and that drastic measures are unlikely. Clear communication, predictable policies, and constructive dialogue can reduce fear. Without those elements, speculation and anxiety fill the gap, and currencies suffer. For now, Iraq's economy moves forward under this cloud of uncertainty, with every trader, merchant, and worker aware that the next shift in political relations could bring another wave of financial consequences. The story is not only about diplomacy or strategy. It is about how those forces shape the value of money in people's pockets and the cost of the goods they rely on every single day. Iraq's entire economic structure rests on a foundation that is both powerful and fragile at the same time. That foundation is oil. For decades, oil has provided the vast majority of the country's income, funding everything from government salaries to infrastructure projects, from healthcare systems to electricity grids. It has allowed the state to function, to pay its employees, to maintain public services, and to support millions of families who depend directly or indirectly on government spending. Yet this heavy dependence also creates a serious vulnerability, because when nearly all of a nation's revenue comes from one source, any disruption to that source can shake the entire system. More than 90% of Iraq's government revenue comes from oil exports. That number alone explains just how concentrated the economy has become. Unlike countries with diversified industries such as manufacturing, technology, agriculture, and tourism, Iraq relies overwhelmingly on a single commodity. When oil flows smoothly and prices are strong, the government has money to operate. When oil revenues face obstacles, everything tightens at once. There is very little cushion and very little room to maneuver. Every month, billions of dollars generated from oil sales are used to pay public sector workers, maintain roads and bridges, fund schools and hospitals, and cover the countless administrative costs of running a modern state. Millions of Iraqis work directly for the government or receive pensions and benefits tied to government spending. For them, oil revenue is not just an economic statistic. It is their salary, their rent money, their grocery budget, and their children's future. But the path those oil revenues take is not entirely domestic. Because oil is traded globally in US dollars and because international financial systems are deeply linked to American institutions, much of Iraq's oil income is processed and held through accounts connected to the US Federal Reserve System. This arrangement was originally designed to provide transparency and stability. It ensures that funds are tracked, verified, and protected within a trusted international framework. Under normal conditions, this system works efficiently, allowing Iraq to access its earnings and transfer money where it is needed. However, this same arrangement also creates a point of leverage. When a country's main source of income is held or cleared through another nation's financial system, access to that money is never entirely independent. If relations are strong, everything runs smoothly. If tensions rise, that access can become uncertain. Even small delays or restrictions can cause outsized consequences for a country so heavily dependent on those funds. The risk becomes clear when considering what would happen if Iraq's access to its oil revenues were restricted, slowed, or temporarily frozen. Government finances are structured around the expectation that dollars will arrive consistently. Budgets are planned months in advance. Salaries are scheduled. Contracts are signed. Projects are approved. All of this assumes that the money will be there on time. If the flow is interrupted, the entire schedule collapses. Imagine a scenario where access to oil revenue accounts is suddenly delayed. The government expects to receive billions of dollars to cover monthly expenses, but those funds do not arrive when planned. Immediately, officials face difficult choices. Do they pay public sector workers first, or contractors building roads and hospitals? Do they fund electricity supplies, or social programs? With limited cash on hand, priorities become painful trade-offs. The first and most immediate impact would likely be on salaries. Iraq has one of the largest public sectors in the region. Teachers, doctors, police officers, administrative staff, and countless other workers depend on government paychecks. If oil revenue is restricted, even briefly, salary payments could be delayed. For many families living month to month, a delay of even a few weeks can be devastating. Rent goes unpaid. Bills accumulate. Savings disappear quickly. This kind of salary shock spreads rapidly through the economy. When government employees do not receive their wages, they reduce spending. Shops sell fewer goods. Restaurants see fewer customers. Transportation services slow down. The money that normally circulates through neighborhoods suddenly tightens. One missed paycheck can ripple outward, affecting dozens of businesses and hundreds of other workers. Beyond salaries, government spending on infrastructure would also suffer. Projects to repair roads, expand power grids, build schools, and modernize hospitals rely on steady funding. Contractors expect payments according to agreed timelines. If those payments stop or slow down, work halts. Construction sites go quiet. Workers are sent home. Progress stalls. Over time, delays increase costs and discourage future investment. Essential services could also face strain. Hospitals require supplies. Water systems need maintenance. Electricity networks need fuel and repairs. All of these depend on government budgets funded by oil revenue. If access to those funds is disrupted, even temporarily, the quality of services could decline. Shortages might appear. Maintenance could be postponed. Problems that are normally manageable could grow into larger crises. Banks and financial institutions would feel the pressure as well. When the government is short on dollars, the entire banking system becomes cautious. Liquidity tightens. Loans become harder to obtain. Businesses struggle to finance imports or expansion. Economic activity slows further. What begins as a restriction on oil revenue can quickly turn into a broader financial slowdown affecting every sector. The psychological effect might be just as damaging as the financial one. Confidence is critical in any economy. People need to believe that their government can pay its bills and that the financial system will function normally. If access to oil money appears uncertain, trust erodes. Citizens begin converting dinars into dollars or gold. Investors hold back. Businesses delay hiring. These defensive behaviors, while understandable, weaken the economy even more. Foreign investors also watch these developments closely. They look for stability, predictability, and reliable access to funds. If Iraq appears vulnerable to external financial pressure, investors may decide the risk is too high. Capital flows elsewhere. Without new investment, growth slows, jobs become scarcer, and the economy becomes even more dependent on oil, reinforcing the same vulnerability. Another consequence is the exchange rate. When people fear that dollar flows might be restricted, demand for dollars increases sharply. Businesses and individuals rush to secure foreign currency before conditions worsen. This surge in demand pushes the dinar lower. A weaker dinar then makes imports more expensive, raising prices for everyday goods. Inflation rises, and the cost of living increases for everyone. For families already coping with tight budgets, these rising costs add another layer of hardship. Food becomes more expensive. Medicine costs more. School supplies and transportation prices rise. Even those who are not directly dependent on government salaries feel the squeeze. The effects spread across society, touching nearly every household. What makes this situation particularly challenging is that it leaves Iraq with limited alternatives. Diversifying the economy takes years of investment and structural reform. Building strong manufacturing, agriculture, or technology sectors cannot happen overnight. In the short term, oil remains the dominant source of income. That means any threat to oil revenue access carries enormous weight. This dependence turns financial access into a strategic issue rather than just an economic one. Decisions made far beyond Iraq's borders can shape domestic stability. Political disagreements can translate directly into financial risk. The link between diplomacy and daily life becomes unmistakable. A statement from a foreign official can influence exchange rates. A policy change abroad can affect whether workers receive their paychecks on time. Inside the country, policymakers understand these risks clearly. They know that maintaining uninterrupted access to oil revenue is essential not just for growth but for basic stability. Without it, even routine governance becomes difficult. Every ministry, every project, every public service depends on those funds. The entire structure rests on that single, steady flow of dollars. For ordinary citizens, the situation feels personal rather than theoretical. They may not follow the details of international finance, but they understand what it means if salaries are late or prices rise. They feel the consequences immediately. Economic vulnerability becomes part of everyday conversation, discussed in homes, markets, and workplaces. People adjust spending, postpone purchases, and worry about what might happen next. All of this underscores how fragile an economy can become when it relies too heavily on one source of income and one external financial channel. Oil has given Iraq enormous resources, but it has also created dependence. The same system that provides revenue can become a pressure point during times of tension. Access to funds that should represent national wealth can suddenly feel uncertain. In the end, the risk is not just about numbers on a balance sheet. It is about whether teachers get paid, whether hospitals have supplies, whether construction continues, whether families can afford groceries, and whether the country can function normally from one month to the next. When more than 90% of government revenue depends on oil, and when that oil money sits within a system influenced by another nation's financial authority, any restriction or delay carries the potential to trigger far-reaching consequences that touch every corner of society. Gold prices are climbing rapidly, and the move is capturing attention across global markets. In recent months, the metal has surged to levels never seen before, breaking record after record and signaling a strong shift in investor behavior. What might appear at first to be just another commodity rally is actually tied to deeper forces shaping the world economy. Behind the scenes, a combination of geopolitical tensions, central bank strategies, changing interest rate expectations, and a growing demand for safe assets is driving this powerful rise in gold. When investors feel confident about the future, they usually put their money into assets that offer growth. They buy stocks, invest in businesses, and take calculated risks in hopes of higher returns. But when uncertainty increases, that mindset changes quickly. Instead of chasing profit, people focus on protecting what they already have. They begin looking for assets that can hold their value even if markets fall or currencies weaken. For centuries, gold has been one of the most trusted options for that purpose. One of the biggest reasons gold is rising right now is the increase in geopolitical tensions around the world. Conflicts between nations, regional wars, trade disputes, and political rivalries are creating an environment where the future feels less predictable. Every time tensions escalate, investors worry about the potential consequences. Military conflicts can disrupt energy supplies, damage trade routes, and slow down global growth. Diplomatic standoffs can lead to sanctions or economic restrictions. Even rumors of instability are enough to shake confidence in financial markets. When uncertainty grows, investors naturally look for safety. Gold benefits directly from this behavior. Unlike currencies or stocks, gold is not tied to the performance of any one country or government. It does not depend on political stability or economic policy. Its value comes from its rarity and universal acceptance. Because of this, many people see gold as a kind of financial shelter during storms. As more investors seek that shelter, demand rises and prices climb. Another important driver behind gold's rise is the growing role of central banks. These institutions manage national reserves and make long-term decisions to protect their country's financial stability. In recent years, many central banks have been buying more gold than ever before. Instead of holding all their reserves in foreign currencies like the US dollar or the euro, they are diversifying into gold to reduce risk. There are several reasons for this shift. Currency reserves can lose value due to inflation or exchange rate fluctuations. They can also become vulnerable to political pressure or sanctions. Gold, on the other hand, is a physical asset that does not rely on another country's financial system. By increasing their gold holdings, central banks gain more independence and protection. When these large institutions buy gold in bulk, they add massive demand to the market. That steady, institutional buying pushes prices higher over time. Interest rate expectations are also playing a major role. Interest rates influence nearly every part of the financial system. When rates are high, assets like bonds and savings accounts become more attractive because they offer steady returns. In that environment, gold can seem less appealing since it does not pay interest or dividends. Investors might prefer income-generating assets instead. But when rates are expected to fall, the situation changes. Lower interest rates mean lower returns on traditional investments. At the same time, borrowing becomes cheaper, and currencies can weaken. In such conditions, gold becomes more competitive. Since it does not rely on interest payments, its relative attractiveness improves. If investors believe that major central banks, especially the US Federal Reserve, will cut rates, they often move money into gold ahead of time. This shift in expectations alone can drive significant price increases. Inflation concerns add another layer to the story. When prices for goods and services rise steadily, the purchasing power of money declines. What you could buy for $100 last year might cost $110 or $120 this year. Over time, savings held in cash lose value. Gold has traditionally been viewed as a hedge against this problem. Because its supply is limited and it cannot be printed like paper money, it tends to maintain value over long periods. During times of inflation, many investors buy gold to protect their wealth from erosion. At the same time, financial market volatility is encouraging people to move into safer assets. Stock markets can experience sharp swings. Currencies can rise and fall quickly. Cryptocurrencies can be extremely unpredictable. In contrast, gold has a reputation for stability. It may not always deliver huge gains, but it often holds steady when other assets decline. For cautious investors, that stability is very attractive. This behavior creates a powerful cycle. As more investors move money into gold, prices rise. Rising prices then attract even more attention. More attention brings more buyers. Each new wave of demand pushes the metal higher. Over time, what started as cautious buying can turn into a strong rally. There is also a psychological factor at work. Gold carries deep historical and cultural significance. For thousands of years, it has been associated with wealth, security, and permanence. When people feel uncertain about the future, they instinctively trust something that has held value for generations. That trust reinforces demand, especially in times of crisis. All of these forces are working together at the same time. Geopolitical risks are increasing. Central banks are buying heavily. Interest rates may fall. Inflation remains a concern. Investors are seeking protection. Each factor alone could support higher prices, but combined, they create a powerful push upward. That is why gold is not just rising slowly but breaking records and reaching levels never seen before. The surge in gold prices is more than just a market trend. It reflects how people and institutions around the world are feeling. It shows a preference for safety over risk and caution over optimism. Whenever gold climbs this strongly, it usually means that confidence elsewhere is fading. In that sense, gold is not only a precious metal but also a signal, quietly revealing the level of uncertainty shaping the global economy. Iraq's current currency challenges are not happening in isolation. They are part of a much larger picture that connects local economic pressures with global financial uncertainty. What is happening inside Iraq's markets is deeply influenced by events far beyond its borders, from shifts in US monetary policy to rising geopolitical tensions around the world. The weakening of the dinar is not simply a domestic issue caused by internal supply and demand. Instead, it reflects a chain reaction where global forces, political risks, and investor sentiment all combine to shape the value of the currency. In today's interconnected world, no economy operates alone. Every country is linked through trade, banking systems, and international capital flows. When something major changes in one part of the world, the effects quickly spread elsewhere. For Iraq, this connection is especially strong because its economy relies heavily on oil exports, imports of goods, and access to the US dollar. These ties mean that any global disruption can directly influence the dinar stability. One of the most important global factors affecting Iraq right now is the strength of the US dollar. Over the past few years, the dollar has remained strong compared to many other currencies. This strength is partly driven by US monetary policy, higher interest rates, and investor confidence in the American economy. When the dollar strengthens globally, it becomes more expensive for other countries to obtain. For nations like Iraq that depend heavily on dollars for trade, this creates immediate pressure. Think of it this way: if the dollar becomes stronger, it takes more dinars to buy the same amount of US currency. Even if nothing changes inside Iraq, the exchange rate can still worsen simply because the dollar is gaining value worldwide. This puts the dinar at a disadvantage from the start. Importers must pay more for goods, businesses face higher costs, and demand for dollars rises quickly. As demand rises, supply often struggles to keep up. Merchants rush to secure dollars before rates climb further. Exchange markets become crowded. Currency dealers adjust prices upward. This increased competition pushes the dinar lower. What begins as a global dollar trend turns into a local currency problem almost overnight. But the story does not end there. Political risks also play a major role. Investors pay close attention not only to economic data but also to political stability. When a country appears politically uncertain, markets become cautious. In Iraq's case, ongoing tensions involving government formation, militia influence, and foreign relations have raised concerns among international observers. These concerns make investors hesitant to commit money to the country. Investment depends heavily on trust. Businesses and financial institutions want to know that rules will remain stable, contracts will be honored, and policies will not change suddenly. When political disputes dominate headlines, that trust weakens. Instead of bringing money into the country, investors may move funds elsewhere. Less investment means fewer dollars entering the economy, which again tightens supply and pressures the dinar. The connection between politics and currency values is stronger than many people realize. Even rumors can move markets. If traders believe there is a risk of sanctions, restrictions, or financial complications, they react immediately. They do not wait for confirmation. They start protecting themselves by buying dollars or shifting assets into safer locations. That behavior alone can weaken the local currency. At the same time, regional instability adds another layer of uncertainty. The Middle East has faced ongoing conflicts, security concerns, and shifting alliances. Whenever tensions rise in the region, global investors tend to reduce exposure. They view the area as higher risk compared to more stable markets. This cautious approach means less foreign capital flowing into countries like Iraq. With fewer external dollars entering the system, maintaining currency stability becomes even harder. Local businesses feel this pressure quickly. Importers find it more expensive to bring in products. Retailers face higher costs and must either raise prices or accept lower profits. Consumers end up paying more for everyday goods. What started as global uncertainty becomes a real-life issue for families buying groceries or paying bills. The link between world events and daily life becomes very clear. Psychology also plays a powerful role in this process. Once people begin to lose confidence in the dinar, their behavior changes. They may convert savings into dollars or gold to protect their wealth. Businesses may hold foreign currency instead of local cash. These defensive actions reduce trust in the dinar even further. When fewer people want to hold the local currency, its value naturally declines. This creates a cycle that feeds on itself. A weaker dinar causes worry. Worry leads to more dollar buying. More dollar buying weakens the dinar further. Breaking this cycle becomes difficult because it is driven as much by emotion and perception as by actual economic fundamentals. Confidence is hard to rebuild once it has been shaken. Global financial markets amplify these effects. News travels instantly. A single report about political pressure or economic risk can spread worldwide in minutes. Traders in different countries react simultaneously. Capital moves faster than ever before. For Iraq, this means that local developments are constantly being judged through an international lens. Even small concerns can lead to outsized reactions. At the same time, global investors are increasingly choosing safer assets such as gold or strong currencies. When uncertainty rises, money flows away from emerging markets and toward perceived safe havens. This global shift reduces liquidity in smaller economies. Countries like Iraq must then compete harder to attract and keep capital. Without steady inflows, supporting the local currency becomes more challenging. All of these elements are connected like pieces of a puzzle. A strong dollar raises costs. Political tensions reduce confidence. Regional risks discourage investment. Investors pull back. Dollar supply tightens. Demand increases. The dinar weakens. None of these factors alone tells the whole story, but together they explain why Iraq's currency problems are tied so closely to wider global uncertainty. In the end, the dinar's movement reflects more than domestic policy. It mirrors the broader mood of the world economy. When global conditions feel stable and predictable, local currencies tend to perform better. When uncertainty dominates headlines, pressure spreads everywhere, especially to economies that rely heavily on external trade and foreign currency. Iraq sits right at the center of this connection, where global forces and local realities meet, and where every shift in international confidence can be felt directly in the value of its money. Iraq is currently facing a complex and highly sensitive situation that has drawn warnings from experts and analysts who describe the country as standing at a dangerous crossroads. This phrase reflects both the immediate political challenges and the longer-term economic risks that the nation faces. The central concern is that political instability is not simply a matter of governance. It is now directly affecting the economy, investor confidence, and the daily lives of ordinary citizens. Experts emphasize that the choices made by political leaders in the coming months could determine whether Iraq stabilizes or slides into a deeper crisis. The term dangerous crossroads reflects a convergence of multiple pressures. On one hand, Iraq is in the process of forming a new government, which is always a sensitive period in any country. On the other hand, there are growing concerns about the influence of armed groups and militias within political decision-making. These groups, while historically significant in Iraq's security and political landscape, are viewed by both domestic and international observers as a source of unpredictability. When factions outside formal state structures hold influence over governance, it complicates decision-making, undermines public trust, and raises doubts among international partners about Iraq's stability. Political instability has tangible economic consequences. Investors and businesses rely on a predictable political environment to make plans and commitments. When governance is uncertain, market participants become cautious. They may delay investments, postpone projects, or move capital to safer locations. In Iraq's case, this caution is compounded by the fact that the economy is heavily dependent on oil revenues, which make up the vast majority of state income. Any disruption to governance, or perceptions that governance is unstable, can create ripple effects in financial markets, the currency exchange system, and public sector operations. Experts have therefore urged Iraqi leaders to strengthen the control of state institutions over critical areas of governance. The goal is to consolidate authority within the government so that decision-making is transparent, predictable, and accountable. When state institutions operate effectively and independently, they provide stability for both domestic markets and international partners. This is especially important for countries like Iraq, where public confidence in governance has been eroded by years of conflict, corruption, and fragmented authority. By reinforcing state control, leaders can signal to citizens and investors alike that the government is capable of managing the country's affairs responsibly. Reducing the influence of armed groups is another priority highlighted by experts. While militias and other armed factions have played historical roles in Iraq's political and security systems, their involvement in formal governance can create conflicts of interest and hinder transparency. When decision-making power rests partially outside official state channels, it raises the risk of arbitrary policies, policy reversals, or decisions that prioritize factional interests over national stability. Experts argue that minimizing this influence is essential to restore both economic and political confidence, as well as to ensure that security and governance follow consistent legal frameworks. Restoring international confidence is equally critical. Iraq's economy, particularly its oil sector, relies heavily on international markets and foreign investment. Diplomatic relationships, trade agreements, and financial partnerships all depend on the perception that Iraq is stable and capable of honoring its commitments. When the international community views Iraq as unstable or influenced by non-state actors, it can limit foreign engagement, slow down investment, and even affect access to critical financial infrastructure. By taking clear steps to consolidate state authority and reduce armed group influence, Iraqi leaders can signal to the world that the government is prepared to operate independently and responsibly. These warnings highlight the interconnectedness of political and economic stability. Instability in governance leads to uncertainty in markets, which in turn affects citizens' livelihoods. Public sector salaries, infrastructure projects, and social services all rely on predictable financial flows. If political tensions result in frozen accounts, delayed budgets, or limited foreign investment, the effects are felt immediately by ordinary Iraqis. Families experience higher prices for goods, delays in services, and increased financial stress. Businesses face rising costs and uncertainty about future regulations. In this context, expert warnings serve not only as guidance for policymakers but also as a reflection of the real consequences that political choices have on everyday life. Analysts also emphasize the importance of long-term strategic planning. Strengthening state institutions and reducing armed group influence are not short-term measures. They require sustained commitment and careful implementation. Reforms must be designed to balance political realities with the need for effective governance. This includes building legal frameworks that ensure accountability, creating mechanisms to integrate security forces under state authority, and establishing transparent processes for public spending. Without such comprehensive planning, temporary measures may fail to achieve lasting stability. Moreover, the messaging from experts underscores the urgency of action. Iraq is at a point where delays in addressing political and security challenges could exacerbate existing economic pressures. The currency market, public sector stability, and investor confidence are already under strain. Each day that uncertainty persists increases the risk of further destabilization. By taking decisive steps now, leaders have the opportunity to prevent deeper crises and lay the groundwork for a more stable and prosperous future. The situation also has broader regional implications. Iraq occupies a strategically important position in the Middle East, both politically and economically. Its stability affects neighboring countries, trade routes, and regional security dynamics. Instability within Iraq can have spillover effects, influencing energy markets, refugee flows, and diplomatic relationships. Conversely, a more stable Iraq can contribute positively to regional cooperation, trade, and security arrangements. This regional dimension reinforces why expert guidance emphasizes strengthening state control and consolidating authority under formal institutions. Public perception is another key element in this equation. Citizens must see tangible evidence that the government is capable of maintaining order, delivering services, and protecting the nation's interests. Confidence among the populace strengthens social cohesion and reduces the likelihood of unrest. Reducing armed group influence and reinforcing state authority are therefore not only measures aimed at satisfying international observers but also steps that build legitimacy within Iraq itself. When citizens trust that the government is in control and capable of acting in their best interests, social stability improves, which in turn supports economic and political stability. Experts' warnings about Iraq being at a dangerous crossroads are a reflection of the urgency, complexity, and high stakes involved. Political instability cannot be separated from economic outcomes. The two are deeply intertwined. Strengthening state control, reducing armed group influence, and restoring international confidence are all measures aimed at creating a stable environment where governance, markets, and citizens' livelihoods can function predictably. The choices made today will shape not only Iraq's immediate future but also its ability to recover, grow, and thrive in the years ahead. By addressing these challenges proactively, Iraqi leaders have the opportunity to steer the country away from risk and toward a path of stability and resilience. Iraq is currently facing a complex and highly sensitive situation that has drawn warnings from experts and analysts who describe the country as standing at a dangerous crossroads. This phrase reflects both the immediate political challenges and the longer-term economic risks that the nation faces. The central concern is that political instability is not simply a matter of governance. It is now directly affecting the economy, investor confidence, and the daily lives of ordinary citizens. Experts emphasize that the choices made by political leaders in the coming months could determine whether Iraq stabilizes or slides into a deeper crisis. The term dangerous crossroads reflects a convergence of multiple pressures. On one hand, Iraq is in the process of forming a new government, which is always a sensitive period in any country. On the other hand, there are growing concerns about the influence of armed groups and militias within political decision-making. These groups, while historically significant in Iraq's security and political landscape, are viewed by both domestic and international observers as a source of unpredictability. When factions outside formal state structures hold influence over governance, it complicates decision-making, undermines public trust, and raises doubts among international partners about Iraq's stability. Political instability has tangible economic consequences. Investors and businesses rely on a predictable political environment to make plans and commitments. When governance is uncertain, market participants become cautious. They may delay investments, postpone projects, or move capital to safer locations. In Iraq's case, this caution is compounded by the fact that the economy is heavily dependent on oil revenues, which make up the vast majority of state income. Any disruption to governance, or perceptions that governance is unstable, can create ripple effects in financial markets, the currency exchange system, and public sector operations. Experts have therefore urged Iraqi leaders to strengthen the control of state institutions over critical areas of governance. The goal is to consolidate authority within the government so that decision-making is transparent, predictable, and accountable. When state institutions operate effectively and independently, they provide stability for both domestic markets and international partners. This is especially important for countries like Iraq, where public confidence in governance has been eroded by years of conflict, corruption, and fragmented authority. By reinforcing state control, leaders can signal to citizens and investors alike that the government is capable of managing the country's affairs responsibly. Reducing the influence of armed groups is another priority highlighted by experts. While militias and other armed factions have played historical roles in Iraq's political and security systems, their involvement in formal governance can create conflicts of interest and hinder transparency. When decision-making power rests partially outside official state channels, it raises the risk of arbitrary policies, policy reversals, or decisions that prioritize factional interests over national stability. Experts argue that minimizing this influence is essential to restore both economic and political confidence, as well as to ensure that security and governance follow consistent legal frameworks. Restoring international confidence is equally critical. Iraq's economy, particularly its oil sector, relies heavily on international markets and foreign investment. Diplomatic relationships, trade agreements, and financial partnerships all depend on the perception that Iraq is stable and capable of honoring its commitments. When the international community views Iraq as unstable or influenced by non-state actors, it can limit foreign engagement, slow down investment, and even affect access to critical financial infrastructure. By taking clear steps to consolidate state authority and reduce armed group influence, Iraqi leaders can signal to the world that the government is prepared to operate independently and responsibly. These warnings highlight the interconnectedness of political and economic stability. Instability in governance leads to uncertainty in markets, which in turn affects citizens' livelihoods. Public sector salaries, infrastructure projects, and social services all rely on predictable financial flows. If political tensions result in frozen accounts, delayed budgets, or limited foreign investment, the effects are felt immediately by ordinary Iraqis. Families experience higher prices for goods, delays in services, and increased financial stress. Businesses face rising costs and uncertainty about future regulations. In this context, expert warnings serve not only as guidance for policymakers but also as a reflection of the real consequences that political choices have on everyday life. Analysts also emphasize the importance of long-term strategic planning. Strengthening state institutions and reducing armed group influence are not short-term measures. They require sustained commitment and careful implementation. Reforms must be designed to balance political realities with the need for effective governance. This includes building legal frameworks that ensure accountability, creating mechanisms to integrate security forces under state authority, and establishing transparent processes for public spending. Without such comprehensive planning, temporary measures may fail to achieve lasting stability. Moreover, the messaging from experts underscores the urgency of action. Iraq is at a point where delays in addressing political and security challenges could exacerbate existing economic pressures. The currency market, public sector stability, and investor confidence are already under strain. Each day that uncertainty persists increases the risk of further destabilization. By taking decisive steps now, leaders have the opportunity to prevent deeper crises and lay the groundwork for a more stable and prosperous future. The situation also has broader regional implications. Iraq occupies a strategically important position in the Middle East, both politically and economically. Its stability affects neighboring countries, trade routes, and regional security dynamics. Instability within Iraq can have spillover effects, influencing energy markets, refugee flows, and diplomatic relationships. Conversely, a more stable Iraq can contribute positively to regional cooperation, trade, and security arrangements. This regional dimension reinforces why expert guidance emphasizes strengthening state control and consolidating authority under formal institutions. Public perception is another key element in this equation. Citizens must see tangible evidence that the government is capable of maintaining order, delivering services, and protecting the nation's interests. Confidence among the populace strengthens social cohesion and reduces the likelihood of unrest. Reducing armed group influence and reinforcing state authority are therefore not only measures aimed at satisfying international observers but also steps that build legitimacy within Iraq itself. When citizens trust that the government is in control and capable of acting in their best interests, social stability improves, which in turn supports economic and political stability. Experts' warnings about Iraq being at a dangerous crossroads are a reflection of the urgency, complexity, and high stakes involved. Political instability cannot be separated from economic outcomes. The two are deeply intertwined. Strengthening state control, reducing armed group influence, and restoring international confidence are all measures aimed at creating a stable environment where governance, markets, and citizens' livelihoods can function predictably. The choices made today will shape not only Iraq's immediate future but also its ability to recover, grow, and thrive in the years ahead. By addressing these challenges proactively, Iraqi leaders have the opportunity to steer the country away from risk and toward a path of stability and resilience. Merchants in Baghdad and Erbil are currently operating under heightened alert as currency fluctuations continue to impact daily business operations. Exchange rates are changing rapidly, and the pace of these changes has created a climate of uncertainty for both traders and consumers. Business owners are monitoring the market closely, trying to anticipate the next movement in the dinar's value to protect their profits and ensure they can meet their financial obligations. Even small shifts in the exchange rate can have immediate consequences, affecting import costs, pricing strategies, and the ability to purchase foreign currency for international trade. This volatility has a direct effect on the cost of everyday goods. As the dinar weakens, merchants are forced to raise prices to cover higher costs for imported products. Food, household items, and other essentials are becoming more expensive, and consumers are feeling the impact in their day-to-day lives. Families are having to adjust budgets, prioritize spending, and in some cases reduce consumption to cope with rising prices. The fluctuation in prices is not just a matter of economic statistics. It is a tangible change that affects how people shop, what they can afford, and the overall standard of living. The heightened alert among merchants also reflects broader concerns about market stability. Currency volatility creates an environment in which decision-making becomes riskier. Importers, wholesalers, and retailers must make choices about purchasing and pricing with limited certainty about the future value of the dinar. Delays in acquiring dollars, or sudden spikes in the exchange rate, can disrupt supply chains, causing shortages or forcing merchants to seek alternative sources at higher costs. This, in turn, can lead to further price increases for consumers, creating a cycle of pressure that affects both the market and the public. Citizens are acutely aware of these challenges. Rising prices, combined with the uncertainty of currency values, contribute to a sense of economic vulnerability. Families are watching their budgets closely, trying to make ends meet amid ongoing fluctuations in the cost of goods and services. Daily life is increasingly shaped by these financial pressures, with ordinary Iraqis adjusting spending habits, seeking more affordable alternatives, and sometimes cutting back on non-essential purchases. The combination of alert merchants, rapid exchange rate changes, and rising costs paints a picture of a market under stress, where both businesses and consumers are navigating an environment of heightened economic uncertainty. This situation underscores the direct link between currency stability and everyday life. When the dinar weakens and prices rise, the effects are immediately felt across households and local markets. Merchants, investors, and citizens alike are all part of the same system, responding to shifts in exchange rates and adjusting behavior accordingly. In Baghdad and Erbil, the current market mood reflects both caution and vigilance as everyone adapts to a rapidly changing economic environment. The pressure on Iraq's economy is intensifying as the dinar continues to weaken against the US dollar. Merchants in Baghdad and Erbil are keeping a close eye on currency fluctuations, aware that even small changes in exchange rates can have immediate consequences for their businesses and daily life. Importers face rising costs as the weakening dinar makes it more expensive to acquire dollars for international trade, and many are passing those costs on to consumers, leading to higher prices for food, household goods, and other essentials. Families are feeling the impact directly, adjusting budgets and cutting back on non-essential spending to cope with rising costs. At the same time, the global gold market is seeing historic highs, with prices surpassing $5,100 an ounce. Investors around the world are turning to gold as a safe haven amid increasing geopolitical tensions, uncertainty in financial markets, and concerns about currency volatility. The surge in gold prices highlights the widespread anxiety among global investors, reflecting fears of economic instability that extend far beyond Iraq's borders. The situation in Iraq is also deeply tied to political dynamics and international pressure. Washington has been vocal about its expectations regarding the formation of Iraq's next government and the influence of armed groups within political structures. Experts warn that failure to meet these expectations could trigger restrictions on dollar transactions, which would directly affect Iraq's access to its own oil revenues. With oil revenues accounting for the majority of the country's state income, any disruption could have immediate consequences for public sector salaries, infrastructure projects, and overall economic stability. Merchants and citizens alike are experiencing the real-world effects of these pressures. The weakened dinar, rising import costs, and economic uncertainty have created a climate where every financial decision feels risky. Families watch their budgets closely, businesses adjust prices constantly, and investors move money into safer assets like gold. The combination of domestic currency volatility, international political pressure, and historic gold prices paints a picture of an economy navigating turbulent times, with both local and global factors shaping everyday life. As these dynamics continue to unfold, all eyes remain on how the Iraqi dinar will respond in the coming days and what steps Washington may take next. The interplay between domestic economic pressures and global financial trends makes this a critical moment for Iraq, highlighting the delicate balance between politics, markets, and public confidence.